Thanks, Tom.
So,
As Tom says, I'm Carol and I'm working within the Food Safety Authority of Ireland in the Brexit team. So I'm going to cover a little bit different from the previous speakers. I'm going to cover food labelling and resources that are available to help you with the requirements that are now in place to import food and food contact materials from Great Britain. So I'm just going to turn off my camera so you can see the screen a little bit bigger. So, food labelling generates a lot of questions around Brexit. So I'll go through some of the changes that have come about because of Brexit and also clarify the situation around food placed on the EU market before the end of the transition period. So Brexit means significant changes for businesses moving food or food contact materials from or through the United Kingdom. However, the first thing to note is that EU law has not changed. What has changed is the trading relationship between the EU and the United Kingdom. Under the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland, Northern Ireland is legally part of the UK customs territory, but subject to certain provisions of EU law, including EU food law. So this means that there's no change to the current procedure for trade in food between Ireland and Northern Ireland. Food traded from Northern Ireland to the EU is not imported food, but food shipped from Great Britain to Northern Ireland is imported food. However, for food shipped from Great Britain to Northern Ireland for the Northern Irish market only, there is a 3-month grace period currently in place for authorised traders. These are such as supermarkets and their trusted suppliers, and they're exempted from official certification for products of animal origin, composite products, food and feed of non-animal origin, and plant products. These foods must be specifically labelled for the Northern Irish market under the terms of the grace period. Now I'll explain the changes to food labelling because of Brexit. So the next slide, Tom. Yeah, thank you. Here is a list of the mandatory requirements for food information to the consumer, which is for most food businesses what you place on your consumer packs in retail shops. EU food legislation requires that the name and EU address of the food business operator responsible for the food is provided. This must be the EU food business operator whose name the food is marketed, or if that operator is not established in the EU, it must be the importer into the EU. For food labelling purposes, the address of a food business operator established in Northern Ireland will continue to be accepted as an EU address. It's important to note that the food business operator responsible for the presence and accuracy of the food information is the operator whose name and EU address is provided on the label. So we get questions about the scope of food labelling legislation and whether it applies to all food. EU food labelling legislation applies to all food businesses at all stages of the food chain, where their activities concern the provision of food information to consumers. It sets out the mandatory information for food intended for the final consumer, including foods delivered by caterers and foods intended for supply to caterers. The list of these mandatory requirements was in the earlier slide. In the case of pre-packed food intended for the final consumer, but marketed at a stage prior to this, for example in wholesalers, or where pre-packed food is intended for supply to caterers for preparation, processing, splitting or cutting up. The legislation allows for the mandatory requirements to be in the commercial documents, as long as certain information is provided on the external packaging in which the pre-packed foods are presented for marketing. The information needed on the external packaging includes the name and EU address of the food business operator. Food businesses supplying other food businesses with ingredients for food products must make sure that the food business they are supplying are provided with sufficient information to enable them to meet their obligation under the food labelling legislation. So now to the identification marks. The identification mark is applied to foods of animal origin and indicates that it has been produced in an establishment approved in accordance with Regulation 853 of 2004. The format of the mark is set out in legislation, and there are different requirements depending on whether the identification mark relates to an EU or non-EU country. Both the Great Britain identification mark and the Northern Ireland identification mark have changed following the end of the Brexit transition period. The identification mark for Great Britain can no longer have the EU abbreviation and must either have the name written, i.e. United Kingdom, or the 2-letter code in accordance with the relevant ISO standard, which is GB. The new identification mark for Northern Ireland allows for the option of either United Kingdom Northern Ireland or UKNI to be indicated, and this is followed by the approval number of the establishment. The identification mark continues to indicate the letters EC for Northern Ireland. The requirements in terms of food which is placed on the market prior to the end of the transition period depends on whether it is a food of non-animal origin or a food of animal origin. So before explaining the difference placed on the market might mean for you, just to note that any food manufactured in Great Britain since the 1st of January for import into the EU must comply with EU food law, including the requirement for an EU address and the new identification mark. Food of animal origin produced in Northern Ireland since the 1st of January and placed on the market in Ireland would need to have the new Northern Ireland identification mark. Under the terms of the withdrawal agreement, food of non-animal origin that was lawfully placed on the EU or UK market before the end of the transition period may be further made available on the market of the EU or UK and circulate between these two markets until it reaches its end user. Therefore, no changes need to be made to these food products and no relabeling is required. This is not the case for foods of animal origin, such as meat, milk, eggs, honey, or foods containing these products as an ingredient, for example, composite products. Food of animal origin coming from Great Britain must comply with the EU requirements for imported food. In terms of food labelling, this means that the new UK identification mark must be used and the food must also have the address of an EU established food business or the EU importer. Food of animal origin on the market in Ireland, for example in a supermarket or a cold store before the end of the transition period, can remain on the market without the need to change the labelling. For food of animal origin placed on the Northern Irish market before the 1st of January, this food can be placed on the market in Ireland and remain on this market until it reaches its end user without the need to relabel with a new Northern Ireland identification mark. To help with some of these, you might find the EU Stakeholder Notices of interest, especially the Food Law Notice, where the clarification is given regarding the rules that apply from the end of the Brexit transition period. So Noreen, Joe and Deirdre have taken you through the import controls now in place for product coming from Great Britain. I know these requirements can seem overwhelming and there is a lot of terminology and jargon used. But there is good news on this, as the FSAI have a free e-learning modules available that go through each type of product individually and outline what you need to do for each. Colleagues of Noreen's, Joe's and Deirdre's, along with other experts, were involved in developing these modules. As outlined in the earlier presentations, the types of controls carried out at import depend on the type of product being imported. The Brexit Food Import Requirements e-learning module brings you step by step through the requirements for importing food or food contact materials, and it goes through each product type individually. Understanding the requirements for importing composite products can be difficult, and we receive lots of queries from food businesses on composite products. We have a short Brexit mini bite on importing composite products, which should only take 10 minutes to complete, and includes interactive exercises around the following questions. Is your food a composite product or not? Does your composite product need a health certificate? Knowing the import requirements for your products will help to reduce the impact of Brexit on your food business. The e-learning modules are broken down into the following areas, so it is easy to identify what requirements are relevant to the products you are importing. There are lots of Brexit resources available to help you. Come to the Brexit section of our website at FSAI/Brexit for links to all our resources. And colleagues in the HSE and DAFM have also indicated the resources that are available on their website. The Brexit Q&A document contains answers to the questions that food businesses have been asking. This is a live document and will be edited and updated as and when new information becomes available. Subscribe to our Brexit e-zine, which is published frequently and contains bite-sized information on Brexit and food law. Our e-zine last week focused on the documentary requirements for food imports that colleagues have highlighted as part of this webinar. Finally, if you're interested in information in other areas, the Government of Ireland website is a great resource and has lots of information in relation to Brexit there. So I'll just pass back over to Tom for the question and answer session. Thank you, Tom.